I guess there are some signs of the business career, probably as early as where I started a bank in elementary school.
Started a bank in elementary school? Wait, hold on.
Well, wait till you hear the next part.
Top leaders, meaningful conversation, actionable advice, bulldoze complacency, ignite inspiration, create impact. Produced by Southwestern family of companies. This is the Action Catalyst.
Welcome to the Action Catalyst. This is your host, Adam Outland, and today we get to meet the amazing Atif Rafiq. He has been a C-suite leader at McDonald's, Volvo, and MGM, held roles at Yahoo, AOL, Audible, and Goldman Sachs. He's had a 25-year career spanning Silicon Valley and the Fortune 500, and he's developed innovative approaches to leadership and management. And in his book, Decision Sprint, The New Way to Innovate into the Unknown and Move from Strategy to Action, he describes a lot of these strategies. We'll unpack some of these lessons from the book and from his experience. Welcome to the program.
Hello.
If it's okay with you, Atif, I'd love to start way earlier in your career than even your bio suggests. I wanted to hear what is the makeup of this person who's had a very illustrious career in C-suite roles in their professional life. Where did this journey start for you? I mean, were you just fired up in high school about being a future executive?
Well, if we want to roll all the way back, I guess there are some signs of the business career, probably as early as where I started a bank in elementary school and
Started a bank in elementary school? Wait, hold on.
Well, wait till you hear the next part. It folded in a week. I didn't understand what compound interest was. My classmates did, and when they demanded, their interest back, then I folded and I had to borrow the money from my dad. So it was a whole scheme around, using the deposits to buy baseball cards and make some great profits, but it didn't
turn out.
In middle school, one of my teachers did, in a parent-teacher conference, asked my mom, well, what does his dad do for a living? Because he wrote this, every kid's writing about, things like wanting to be a movie producer and, an athlete. And he wrote a paper on the stock market. So what does his dad do? It turned out my dad was a small businessman. So that probably, through osmosis, you see a lot of things going on, because especially as a small business person, it's not like you leave the work at home. He probably brought it home on his phone calls. Probably the seeds were planted fairly early in my childhood. Nature or nurture, it's still an open question.
Yeah. What were kind of the natural skills that were already being birthed? I mean, were you just like great with people? Were you really numbers oriented?
Well, often you don't know what they are till many years later, but you see the signs early. And I think it's probably product orientation, meaning like, what's the big idea? What's the next wave? What's sort of the next trend of product that, seems interesting and quite isn't mainstream, you know what I mean? And so seeing that need and then trying to do something about it. And that's probably where it took me, probably even 10 years into my career to realize, I'm actually somewhat good at that. So let me lean into that piece.
As you're talking about this, a couple of the bullet points on your book, one of them was the exploration raises unanswered questions and considerations to get to the bottom of things, right? And maybe I read that differently, but what I saw in that is something about exploration means curiosity, right? It means asking questions and digging, not necessarily having the answers.
Yeah. Well, I think there's really two interesting things that, you're kind of putting your finger on. One is that what entrepreneurs are really good at is conviction that comes from their vision. If you share that same idea with, 10 other people who are not entrepreneurs, you're likely to see those people have a lot more question marks than confidence, perhaps. You see enough, but for other people, it's still quite a bit of more questions than clarity. Now, putting it into sort of an organization, I think the power of questions has always struck me, because the interesting thing about questions is that they can be neutral. They can take you to be for the idea or against the idea. You just don't know. But if you approach them with curiosity, which is kind of an interest to sort of get to the bottom of it, be neutral about the whole thing, the story will probably speak for itself. And so in companies, what I've found is that there's really not a good way to take advantage of this thing, because one, senior people, and the more senior you go, are expected to, quote unquote, know the answer. Because of the tenure in the company, they feel like they need to take a position, very quickly. Maybe teams feel like, if we don't know the answers, very upfront, then, are we really proving our worth? And so they're not given the space for the curiosity they need to really get to the bottom of what could be a promising idea. But of course, as soon as you go one level lower than the promising idea, you see a ton of questions. And so what I've tried to do, especially in my book, Decision Sprint, is provide teams and companies a way to create space for questions and take action on them.
Yeah. So did you feel that curiosity was an early driver for you? I mean, one of your primary careers that you talked about was Goldman and Sachs. Was it like curiosity that drove you to dig into that?
Well, I started my career at Goldman Sachs right after college. And, honestly, it wasn't a great fit for me because it was all about transactions and numbers. And I didn't really connect with the idea of a transaction as a product. It didn't cut it for me. I made a pivot, very early on. I wrote a letter, a snail mail letter to the founder and CEO AOL, Steve Case, who's a very famous person in the history of the internet. And he actually opened my letter, gave it to another executive, and I got a call, and I was early to the internet, which was a big break for me, because getting involved in a company like AOL before there was a Google, for example, that was very meaningful. And I was hooked. I was like, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. It's going to be about the internet-based, technology. The curiosity did play a factor because I didn't know what to expect. I didn't really know what it meant to work outside, in an industry like that. I didn't know really where the internet was going. So from that perspective, curiosity did kind of help me get going in my career.
Yeah. And, you had a beast, right? AOL was growing. It's huge. There's a lot of complexity, and you ended up in a kind of a corporate development and strategy position. I assume that meant you were overseeing a team and already building your chops in terms of how you managed and led a process.
It was exhilarating and amazing, quite frankly, because being, in my view, and I'm very biased here, I think the most meaningful work that I personally connect with is product creation. Yeah, it's really about conceptualizing what is the product, what's the core product, what does it do, what's the differentiation, what's the sweet spot, what is enough to get it off the ground, and for people to want to say, yeah, let's please make more of that.
So what point did you feel, if any, that you hit that career where you were really stretched as an individual and pushed, or where you feel like you hit a certain breaking point? And what was the lesson from that?
Well, one that I would point to is the pivot from Silicon Valley. I went to, Yahoo and then Amazon, very much sort of familiar setup of an internet company, and this is the product that they make, and this is sort of how we, innovate on the product and manage the business. But I made the pivot to what you would call traditional companies, meaning their inception is before the age of the internet. They're probably not tech companies, really. But the future of their customer experience or the business model is now profoundly affected by technology, and they need to really probably rewire a lot of the guts of the company around technology. And so I became the first chief digital officer in the history of the Fortune 500, and that was with McDonald's in 2013. And so the wall that I hit was one that was cultural, where people haven't grown up in the internet age. It's not a digital native company. And it's not as much, okay, what's the latest idea? How do we spin up a team and see if this might, turn into a really high growth machine? It's a different bar for, vetting ideas and committing to them. It's different. Coming in from this Silicon Valley, you're probably like, oh, it's obvious. This is the next wave. Let's go all in and let's do it as fast as possible. But you need to bring other people along. And a lot of that is why I wrote the book, because rather than say, okay, well, we won't have big ideas and we'll sort of just think small because that's what we could get buy-in around. How do we maintain that high bar for ideas and do it at a quick pace? I had to invent new ways to accomplish that.
And so when you came in at this new digital strategy, were there people just looking at you like, what's your job? Like, what are you doing here, man?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's to be expected because at that time, Mark Andreessen had just coined the phrase, software is eating the world. but people didn't really know what that meant. And so the challenge was to explain, why does digitization matter to McDonald's? And so the way I approached that was to put it in familiar terms. So I would always start with the same sort of spiel where I would say, look, McDonald's over 60 years has been about three things: taste, value, and convenience. And people would nod their heads and agree. And the first two, I can't do anything about with, what I'm focused on here at the company. But the third one, convenience, that's something we've owned and we want to continue to own that in the future, right? And everyone would nod their head. And then the door would be open for the conversation around how can digitization make the McDonald's customer experience even better? So there, you overcome some of the question marks by really respecting the heritage of the company and putting what you're doing in familiar terms. So that was step one. The key thing is to take advantage of the collective intelligence around the table. Like, what would make this hard? How would it break? What do we need to solve for? And just really make that a specific step in the process I was trying to boot up, where the unknowns are something that we sort of kind of take inventory of, and then we actually spend time getting to the bottom of them. Because we're suspending judgment, we're creating space for what I call exploration, and then we're going to move on to the process of drawing conclusions or coming up with recommendations. When I shifted from Amazon to McDonald's, I tried to bring in Amazon's way of working, especially around a narrative into McDonald's for some of our more meaningful ideas. And I found that, obviously it works well at Amazon, and it's a culture where everything you're solving, whether it's an operational problem, a marketing problem, or some type of product idea, has to be distilled into a document. It's a 6-page narrative, and it's essentially sort of an investigation of the idea. And I tried to bring that into McDonald's, and I couldn't make it work. It was more of a conversational environment, right? Like more like let's have a meeting and talk about it. So I was even trying to get people comfortable with, here's a pen and draw it on the whiteboard, right? So it was that kind of situation. And but I was trying different ways to kind of nudge people to think twice, to dig a little deeper, to sort of ask questions, suspend a little judgment until we can do the right fact finding. You know what I mean? Fast forward 5 or 6 years later, and then I started to say, wow, maybe there is a method for this. And so I would run my meetings in different ways where I would gather the right team and I would share with them a 3-step process where I would say, look, our first meeting is going to be this loose sort of brainstorm. We're going to whiteboard a lot. We're going to raise a lot of the important questions and subject matters. And you're going to feel like intimidated by the end of the meeting because you're going to feel like, wow, there's just so much we don't know. But it's okay. I'm going to give you a week and you're going to come back and you're going to put something on the table after a week. And that's going to be our second meeting. And you're going to actually feel pretty good because you're going to say, hey, we see how this puzzle is starting to fit together. And then we're going to look at it. We're going to try and tear it apart. We're going to come up with the next wave of things we want to look into. And then we're going to have a third meeting and you're going to come in really confident and you're going to feel like, wow, we really, you really want people to question you because you've done your homework. You've done the detective work. You are really smart about every aspect of this and you can defend the recommendation that you have on the table.
I've been in some of these, meetings as well where we're kind of trying to figure out the solution to a problem and, you're getting a group of partners together to throw things on a whiteboard and brainstorm and trying to get that puzzle sorted and figure out your priorities. When we've done that, there's some times where it's, like we all agree, right? But a lot of times there's people with different opinions. How do you navigate that? How do you sort through that when there is a big disagreement?
The number one reason why that happens is what I call alignment before exploration. We have to say, well, have we, in my language, sort of built and run an exploration where we've surfaced the important considerations, especially the unknowns, and have we gotten to the bottom of them? And that can be done in as simple a form as an FAQ. And if the answer is no, we don't have a list of the most important questions and we haven't given the responsible people the opportunity to get to the bottom of those questions, then we're a little bit out of sequence. And this is the number one, problem because we put too much expectation on a single meeting to do many things, to brainstorm, to explore, to get to the bottom of questions, to draw conclusions. That's just too much in one interaction, if that makes sense.
And so you find using this process of brainstorm first, be patient, don't try and squeeze it all into one meeting. You can generally get the buy-in of the group along one aligned path through that process. So you play the role of investor advisor to a lot of different startups, or have, right? Including Headspace, SpaceX. I think I've heard of them, 23andMe. I mean, these are really successful companies, right? So you play this role, a little bit of an advisor now to a lot of these folks. My question for you is actually, kind of going back in time real quick. Who played that advisor role to you in your career that helped you formulate who you are today and your procedure and your approach to business?
I would say that I am actually a compilation of a lot of different people. The way that my business career has unfolded is more where I noticed and observed something that I thought was very special, a gift in an individual leader. And I thought to myself, well, that would be a nice gift to have. And so how do I bring a little bit of this person into me? For me, it's been far less of here's one or two people who have consistently been there as mentors, so to speak, and more learning in line to seeing how they're operating in the real environment and saying, wow, that is something to work towards. Actually have some recency bias here, but, going back to, let's say, Volvo, where the CEO, Håkan Samuelsson, was just a very deeply curious person where he would not really worry too much about, well, how much time do we have left in this meeting? Or, are we going to hit our numbers? But more if there was an important curiosity that would kind of fill in the blank for him so he could understand things well enough. He did hesitate to ask those questions. So, curiosity from the CEO, former CEO of Volvo, a very important thing. Rolling back to the CEO of McDonald's, who was the CEO when I first joined, Don Thompson, just a charismatic person. It's very hard to be charismatic if you're not born that way. And he was and is. It's more like he just infected people with positivity. So there's some of that of like, okay, well, building people up. When I look at senior leaders at Amazon, I would say, well, this person really always asks sort of the right question. Like after hearing a fairly complex idea, putting their finger on sort of the one thing that would make or break the idea. So thinking twice, thinking a little bit deeper, trying to synthesize all the information to like, what does it really mean? These are some of the people I've observed sort of out in my career. So it's been a lot less of here's one person who I can always call and have a hotline for what I'm going through, and more of like, okay, well, what can I take from the environment around me?
I really like that approach. I mean, it's kind of what mentorship in some narrative is, which is finding people and their golden nugget. No one's perfect.
I think is also a little bit in recognition that each individual does have some gaps as well. So you say, let me take this part of that person, but not the other, because you see that there are also flaws.
Yeah. Can we talk about all the bad parts of the people you just mentioned? I'm just kidding.
They're only good parts.
They're all the good parts, right? We're called the Action Catalyst podcast in part because interviews and conversations are helping our audience of entrepreneurs and business owners and people figure out how they can be action oriented in their life. And so even your book is around this a little bit in decision making and a team and alignment. On a personal level, what's a habit or practice that you have that saves you the most time each day or helps you be more efficient?
I always give myself the luxury of focusing on one thing and being getting the most meaningful thing right now done as a win for the day. And when you take that mindset, usually you get several things done. You tend to get momentum in what you're trying to achieve.
Yes. Figuring out what that one thing is.
Right now, not from yesterday. Because another mantra sort of I live by is like, what matters most now? And it could be, different today than it was yesterday. And it's certainly not a function of what's the latest thing that came into your inbox or what's calling to, what's biting at you more. It's not, you need to sort of like probably take a step back and really reflect, like, what is the most important thing I can do right now for this team, for this organization, in terms of my contribution, and then really just put a lot of energy and concentration into that. Knock it out of the park. If you get that one thing done, it tends to create a lot of momentum because, let's say you're a leader, it probably unlocks a bunch of other people to go do their thing, creates a lot of clarity for them. If you're an individual contributor, it's still a huge contribution for your organization. It's something they probably need. And now that they have that, 3 other things can happen. But really, by distilling that, something really important gets out the door. I mean, if one thing important can get out the door over the course of an entire week, that's quite a bit of contribution.
Yeah. And that almost sounds to some degree how your process helps organizations as well. That alignment principle of helping the team figure out what that one thing is.
For sure. I mean, even when I talk about the mantra of exploration before alignment, as opposed to the other way around, it's like the order kind of matters, because if you surface the right, unknowns and you get your head around them, get the team's headspace around them, then the alignment's going to be easy. The decision making is going to be easy as well. I've been in so many non-decision meetings, and people look at like, wow, why did we have so much anxiety and think this was going to be hard? Well, they didn't really know that, in the weeks leading up to it, we were doing the work in the right order. And we put so much, concentrated effort into the exploration. We took all the pressure off the decision point.
Having some responsibility of leading a team and dealing with some of the roadblocks that come with that from time to time. I'm looking forward to reading the book as well. So for our listeners out there, check it out. Decision Sprint, the new way to innovate into the unknown and move from strategy to action. Atif, thank you so much for carving out a little window of time for us today and sharing some of your experience and how you came to some of these ideas. So I appreciate your time.
Pleasure to join you, Adam.
If you enjoy this podcast, please make sure to subscribe. And to stay updated on everything that the Action Catalyst is up to, make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Action Catalyst Podcast and on Twitter at Catalyst_Action. And thanks for listening.